台湾地图我血脉残根。Last episode, Dibaji was one of the hardest stories I've had to tell. Not because the history wasn't fascinating, but because it was heavy. Really heavy. This wasn't just any chapter. It was the turning point that shaped the Taiwan we know today. Culturally, economically, politically, and even spiritually. And no, the hardest part wasn't the gunpowder betrayal or the massacre. Those are true action and reaction. You betray me, I take revenge. It's predictable. The real challenge, you'll see in a moment. But first, let's quickly rewind. We explore True Wan's dual social structure, where men and women stood as equals, each with a clearly defined role. We saw how the True Wan motherland welcomed the Saraya as coastal migrants, a matrilineal people whose beliefs flowed with the ocean tides. Then came Tung Ning, brave, ambitious, determined to conquer Qing Chinese. At first, the vision looked promising, but the cost to the motherland was enormous. And those very resources, they were exactly what the world's most powerful militaries were desperate for. I don't even need to mention what is you already know. That's when Formosa's women stepped in. They ended the war with the mainland, brought in Japanese merchants as neutral escrow, and sealed a secret peace treaty. 2 years later, the Qing dynasty declared victory on paper. But in reality, not a single Qing soldier was allowed to set foot on Formosa. That was the hidden treaty few of us ever knew about, but I'm revealing it to you, my friends. Wait, so have you thrown your Chinese history books out yet? Don't worry, the garbage man will help. I threw mine away 45 years ago with a bad taste in my mouth, even though back then we didn't even have a single decent garbage truck like we do today. Life in Taiwan under KMT rule reeked from day one, and not just metaphorically. Betel nut was a gourmet delicacy compared to inhaling the rancid fumes of that Chinese KMT narcissistic regime squatting on my land. And the irony? They thought we were the lowlifes. I am just glad you youngsters don't need to go through that all over again like this poor Taiwanese mutt did. So, the female elders then spent the first year cutting off the supply of new soldiers and gunpowder. They used every local network to bring Tung Ning soldiers back home, starting with the easier to recall kin blocks like the 50-55% who were Paze and Patruku, and the 15-20% Tigdaya and Truku from the Eastern Highlands, while persuading many from scattered coastal and plains clans to shift into mining and gunpowder work instead of being sent to die. Even before all this, the Truku Basai and Patruku had already helped the surviving Saraya resettle across the island, rooting them in place and weaving them into the fabric of other local tribes. So what do you think was the real mental challenge here? On the surface, ending the sacrifice and beginning a peaceful era sounds like the perfect saga. But was it really? But what if I told you that from Tung Ning's perspective? The massacre was their way of ending internal betrayal in the war against the Qing. They called it a necessary action to deal with traitors. And even today, in their patriarchal mindset, they still can't see what was wrong with it. The Tung Ning perhaps only felt remorse for misusing Gaia. Beyond that, killing a traitor was, to them, just as necessary as killing an enemy in war. That's where the real misunderstanding begins, and it runs far deeper than most people realize. Most would think slaughtering the Saraya was wrong without actually chewing on everything both sides had to say. This was a crucial pivot point in Formosa's history. So, don't make that judgment too soon, my friend. Let's get into it. Mid-1660s, the spark before the blaze. Zheng Jing, son of Koxinga, gets word that lights his fuse. The same Japanese ships pulling into Saraya ports aren't just trading for deer hides and sulfur. They're re-exporting gunpowder materials straight to the Qing army. The route? Nagasaki to Ryukyu. Right into enemy hands. For Tong Ning's war council, this is a gut punch. They're already bleeding resources trying to punch through Fujian and the southern Chinese coast. And now the Qing are showing up better explosives. From their view, it's obvious the Siraya-Japan connection is the leak. Here's the setup. After Koxinga kicked out the Dutch in 1662 and planted the Tong Ning Kingdom in southern Taiwan, the Siraya stayed what they'd always been. Sharp, independent coastal traders. Under Dutch rule, they had flourished. Under Gaia protection, they kept those Japanese ties alive. Meanwhile, the Truku and Patriarchal clans were the muscle and the makers, producing the sulfur, the medicinal herbs, the deer hides. Together, the three tribes ran a clean, high-value network that didn't bow to anyone's crown. But to Zheng Jing, that network was now a supply chain for his enemy. And in war, that made all the difference between winning the coast and losing the island. James Ming loyal regime banned all trade with Japan, branding them traitors for siding with the Qing. The problem was Tong Ning had no authority over the Chuan motherland, and the Siraya were under Gaia's shield. No one in the tribal council saw any crime in selling to Japanese merchants. Not then, not ever. From the Siraya's eyes, listen, they weren't selling to the Qing, not one bit. So they came to the Siraya. Stop it, end the trade, now. And the Siraya, they looked right back and said no. Why? But through the Ming loyalist eyes of Tong Ning, oh, that trade was a blade, driven straight into the back of the anti-Qing alliance, because they were sovereign, matrilineal, traitors by birthright, bound to no man's throne, bound to no man's war. But you think that mattered in the war rooms of Tong Ning? Not a damn thing. Remember, the Siraya had Truku Toda living right there on their plains. That's Chuan blood, Gaia's consent. And with the ocean god in their veins, they did what they were born to do. Ship goods to the god's will. Now, before you judge, ask yourself this. If you were Siraya, would you have stopped? Would you bend over for that rigid command? A warrior's nature doesn't argue the way the Sirayan does, I suppose, and so the fuse finally reached the powder. In Tong Ning's war rooms, they were worn down, exhausted from fighting against the Qing's suddenly boosted war machine. Now they knew exactly what had fueled it. What followed would be burned into Siraya memory as the night of the false law, when men came wearing the mask of executioners, not to mediate, but to kill. False law, that's how the Siraya remembered it. But to Tong Ning, no, there was nothing false about it. To them, it was outlaw justice, a reckoning they carried out with their own hands. Because in their eyes, Gaia did not settle the course for them. Two peoples, two truths, one night that would split Formosa. Listen, man, because this This is the moment the fuse gets lit. The moment that split Formosa and now Taiwan, yet still the same way. Same old cut, same old scar, a scar that never healed. And me, I know exactly why, 100%. But the real work is finding a way to make you understand why Taiwan is still split into two sides, so far apart from each other. And the saddest part, both of them lost their root. And I don't see a single sign they're working to find their way back.
Once a sucker, always a sucker.
So, let's keep going. Zheng's Ming loyal Tungning regime, tangled up in the politics of a collapsing dynasty, takes one look at the Saraya's ongoing happy lucrative trade with Japan and sees nothing short of treason.
Stupid! You don't see
Why?
wine inside?
Because Japan had already ditched the Ming, bowed to the Qing, and yet here were the Saraya, under the untouchable protection of Gaia, still sending Formosan goods right down those same sea lanes. To Tungning's war council, this wasn't trade. This was feeding the enemy.
Gonna watch this place burn.
But to the Saraya, this was sovereignty. Their birthright as matrilineal coastal traders who owed no oath to Zheng's mainland ambition. Once again, the rootlessness. Doing what they wanted any way they pleased. Was it legal? Yes. Or was it faithful to their peers? I don't know, you tell me. And here's where I have to ask, isn't Koxinga already Ming Chinese? Or is he now speaking to the Saraya as if he's still a descendant of Gaia? Wakaligong ni naking papai, jitgwa wei do jing paingong. And here's the thing, in the fever heat of war, that kind of nuance gets burned alive. No one in Tungning's war room cared about tribal rights or the fine essence of Gaia. They wanted that leak plugged, period. So the stage is set for a punishment they can't risk delivering in the open, nor they had to rights to. Deploy the Ming's quiet tactical move. They dressed in disguise as Gaia enforcers, carriers of supposed spiritual judgment, walked straight into Saraya territory. And their claim said certain Saraya clans had broken Gaia law, shattering intertribal unity with some kind of foreign trade. The Saraya elders got convinced this was an internal sacred matter, allowed the ritual to go forward. But when the moment came, ritual turned into slaughter. And behind it like the Chinese way, lies dressed as honor, but do it like a devil. Entire households ambushed, elders, women. The cultural anchors of the Japanese alliance gone in a single night. Just like the Mongols wiping out an entire village in one sweep. In Saraya oral tradition, this moment lives under two chilling names. The night of the false law, when Gaia's sacred justice came in disguised, and the fire beneath the deerskins, when the very goods that brought prosperity became the fuel for their own destruction. The Saraya were a strong living branch of the great tree of Motherland, Truan, rooted in Truan soil, fed by its democratic spirit, swaying freely with the tide of coastal trade. But that night, the branch was hacked off in cold, severed from its roots. What was once a vibrant, matrilineal society fell into darkness and silence. Ports empty, alliances scattered, identity bleeding into the sea, from pride to exile. from fullness to nothing, from the greatness of female-centered leadership to corpses lying mess across the land. And Formosa, she's been carrying that wound in silence ever since. A wound that still bleeds, even if most can't see it. How many people in Taiwan today truly understand how deep this cut was to our root? One side, a brave son of Formosa, fighting hard to carve out his destiny. The other, an intelligent daughter of Formosa with global vision, loyal to her beliefs, passionate for new and daring ideas. Formosa, this great tree is wounded since, its branches shattered, its roots amputated. That right here was one of the saddest pivot points in our history. It set this island on a path of division, a path that's lasted more than 350 years, right up to your face here in 2025. How are you calling yourself Taiwanese if you don't know this part of yourself? And most of you might not truly know what went wrong with your root, because you believed the lies the Chinese textbooks fed you and Chinese teachers tried to brainwash you. And because you've been under the Chinese KMT school system for so long, you can't even see who you or who your real ancestors are. The realm of stupidity, I'll say. Because here's the truth. This wasn't just a battle. This was the first deep cut to the living, bleeding root of Formosa. And it wasn't struck by an enemy from across the sea. No, it came from within and stirred by outsiders. Loyalty to a foreign throne delivered the blow, and no closure ever came to seal the wound. That scar is still buried deep in the roots of this land, brothers and sisters. And if you listen closely, you can hear the ache climb all the way up its trunk. Even now, in the year 2025. And hear me on this, keep speaking this KMT language, and Taiwan will never find good closure. That's the honest goddamn truth. This was the first time in Formosa's history that its roots were severely wounded. Not by an outside invader, but amputated by its own hand. A wound struck in silence. Not by foreign invaders, but by the guardians of the motherland herself. When Truan punished her own son, the Tung Ning warriors, for breaking away from Gaia's order, she amputated the roots of an entire Tung Ming population. A point of no return. Unlike what you read in the recorded history, these weren't outsiders. These were the bravest sons of Formosa, men who once dreamed of conquering China in the name of the island. But stripped of recognition, they became rootless. And in that rootlessness, they turned toward the underground coast trading, smuggling, surviving between Fujian and southern coast of Formosa and other nearby islands. That's where they seated themselves as the hybrid Hoklos. Outwardly, they looked Hoklo, speaking the simple tongue and carrying the customs on the surface just like them. Gradually, day by day, they seemed more and more alike, but never truly became them. Because beneath the borrowed language and the practiced habits, the bloodline of the Austronesian could not be erased. They wore the Hoklo mask for survival, but their roots still remembered Formosa, and their core was never Chinese. But deep down, they still carried the iron will of Formosan warriors. You could say they wore a Hoklo mask, but their blood remembered Formosa. Today, yes, even. But here's the flip side. They actually enjoyed being outlaws. After that hidden peace treaty with the Qing, they no longer had to fight wars head on. They knew Siraya and Trukutoda were the mainstream of Formosa, but in the underground, they controlled the turf that really mattered. Their brothers, the Truku, the Paze, the Patruku, nearly all the old Midag tribes, worked side by side to keep that underground network alive. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving, moving goods, moving power. So if you say the Siraya and Trukutoda leaned pro-Japan later, I'll tell you this. The post-Tung Ning clans went big on pro-Hoklo and kept the trade open with the rising Western powers. The British, the Americans, they still kept their lifeline to the Philippines. Just like pirates, no one had real authority over them. And all that lasted through the 222 years, right up until Japan claimed the Ryukyu sailors had been killed, using it as the reason to let Qing migrants settle in southern Formosa, in what is now called Manju and Mudan townships in Pingtung. Under Japan's request, the Qing built the wall in 1879 for one purpose: to stop the hybrid Hoklos from continuing the smuggling activities they had carried on since post-Tung Ning times. Of course, 5 years before the Ryukyu incident, the Mudan incident was already a mystery. But it's almost certain that all the shipping and coastal matters there were tied to the hybrid Hoklos, the rootless descendants of Tung Ning. However, this part of history was never written down clearly. That's why I will make a complete episode about it, because it's such a great story to tell. None of the real truth ever got recorded in official history. And of course, the post-Tung Ning hybrid Hoklos had no choice but to slip into rootlessness. But in that rootlessness, they carved out a freedom where they answered to no empire, no dynasty, no colonizer. Only the underground law of Formosa for 222 years, until later when the Qing wall was built in Manju Mudan townships of Pingtung. Did the pro-Japan Siraya have something to do with this? My big answer is, of course. Hey, but no hurry. We dig deep either way. Because the hybrid Hoklos and the Siraya Nippon, they've been going head to head for over 350 years. So why don't we just lay it all on the table? Dig every layer out. How much uglier can it get? Am I right, or am I right? It was self-punishment, carried out by True One's leadership with pride and unshakable self-determination. A proof of love for the land and its people, even for the Siraya, newcomers from scattered Philippine islands. Though their hearts beat to a different rhythm, they were never treated as outsiders. Welcomed into the motherland Taluan, or you call it True One. Bound by mutual respect, the Siraya were considered kin. The decision to cut off Tung Ning was not taken lightly. It was a moment when unity fractured, when Formosa's democratic heart was tested. Oral tradition remembers 1670 as the dark turning year, when a massacre disguised as ritual enforcement revealed itself as military revenge and political control. And yes, the hand that guided it was not entirely our own. The Ming Chinese pressure pushed the blade deeper. The Siraya paid the price. Imagine a great tree, centuries old, losing one of its strongest branches in a single stroke. The Siraya were that branch flourishing in the coastal winds, bound to the trunk through trust and destiny. When Tung Ning's blades fell, it was not only the Siraya who bled. It was the entire tree of Formosa. From Tung Ning's view, they stood up for Siraya once against the Dutch, Formosa trusted the outsiders, lack of defense, and having no ability to fight invasion when it happened. This time around, they did it again. It was grim necessity. They believed the Saraya leaked precious gunpowder to the Qing through Japanese trade. But the backlash goes to Tong Ning this time instead. In their eyes, Saraya hands had armed the very enemy, killing their brothers. What they call justice, others call vengeance, in massacre. The viewpoint we have now in the modern days seem wrong to kill anyone, right? I think deep down, you know the silent question about the ancient days, especially when it comes to critical defense under war. To the rest of Formosa, it was something else entirely. Self-amputation. The root had been cut by its own branch. Even a ruler born on this island could choose ambition over kinship. And so the act stood as a measure of true one's fairness, proof that not even the powerful were above Gaia. Therefore, Tong Ning's action was considered a sin. Instead, Truan stands behind the Saraya, her daughter, over her son, the Tong Ning. To make note of this, whether Tung Ning was even the name they called themselves in the old days is doubtful. History, as most read it, is not built moment by moment, but pinned down later, arranged by whoever held the pen. And in this case, the pen did not belong to Formosa, but they were sure the warriors of Formosa, the tough fighters of Truan. Of course, that's just my hypothetical view, but I do not think I am too far off. Even so, the reality, way more direct. The Ming didn't just stumble across these warriors. They were awed by the true. The true one had defeated the mighty Dutch, a nation the Ming had always feared. More realistically, fear of losing the entire mainland territories under Dutch strong military force. So now they came to claim the Braves. They came to recruit, to forge a Ming loyalist force out of Formosa's best fighters. They brought silver, laid down the rules, and shaped the force exactly how they wanted. Uniforms, hand last names, and just enough Chinese words for orders to stick. They bankrolled the gunpowder, the recruitment, the outfitting, and for as long as the silver flowed, the deal held. The Ming Chinese got a battle-hardened strike force to throw against the Qing. The Formosan warriors got resources they had never seen in such abundance. Was that a golden ticket to glory or a one-way march into hell? If you ask me, that was Satan calling collect.明朝的国库渐低，力量流失，负担变得巨大无比。南明拥立皇帝朱由榔，已经没什么银两可给，他能给的只有名分和正统。他把管辖于名分交给郑成功，换来的就是一句：继续打，绝不能停。他要求东宁继续战斗，用火药和战士去燃烧最后的希望。崇祯之后延续下来的南明政权，弘光、隆武、永历等，动着而成为大明延续的捍卫者。那是一场以合法性换取无尽小众的交易，一份将动辄拉得更远力气根源的契约。自那一刻起，洞主的身份便与明朝的存亡就缠在一起。他们的忠诚不再只是献给福尔摩沙，而是转向一个异族王朝。 一个要求他们亦或要以血肉为代价的朝廷。问题是这特鲁湾怎么看？难道所有人都要无条件牺牲，不论怎么为胜？当东宁只要源源不断的火药，而特鲁湾却得不到任何保证，这份关系其实早就开始裂解。现在你的把自己放进东宁的靴子里，你是一名福尔摩沙的战士，和清军拼死厮杀，一天天地倾尽你的力气、青春和鲜血。战场上的冷风根本不在乎你来自哪里，他只会无情地割裂你。现在想想一下，你开始听到耳语，接着得到确切的消息，有人来自你自己的家园，正在把同样强大、极其珍贵的火药卖给清军。卖给谁？就是你拼命想击败的敌人。那难道不会点燃你心中的火焰吗？那就是东宁的临界点。他们将西拉雅的贸易视为背叛，是他们无法突破清军防线的原因，也是战争被拖延国救的根源。在他们眼中，西拉雅的手正式武装了那支屠杀他们兄弟的军队，而再多的外交也无法洗刷这笔血债。In their eyes, Saraya hands had armed the very force that was killing their brothers, and no amount of diplomacy could wash that away. And so, in their anger, Tong Ning struck. What they call justice, others call massacre. In that moment, the blade bit deep into Formosa's root, and the scar has never truly faded. Tong Ning's eyes were no longer on Formosa. They were locked on China, chasing the dream of becoming the next great dynasty. And Formosa, she wasn't enough for their appetite anymore.我个人其实不喜欢一再挖掘那些旧往事，但是对台湾来说，那段历史维语的伤口，以及对分裂真相的含糊与逃避，已经让这个国家陷入不确定与脆弱的处境，甚至随时面临危险。中国共产党与中国政权的无声渗透，正以电一滴地深入台湾，也深入我们的生活，仿佛我们若一事不慎，随时都可能被夺走。这道维鱼河的伤口就是他们最好下手的目标，随时准备把拿到巴斯裂得更大、更深、更知名。我们早就忘了到底为了什么在内斗，这就是事实。因为这样，这场硬碰硬的冲突就这样拖下去350年，8个时代，到现在还没完。这道伤口从来没愈合过，只是一代一代传下去，疤痕叠住疤痕，血里再刻一刀。所以别再绕了，直接面对吧。这就是为什么台湾至今还在分裂。你知道吗？当东宁和泰鲁湾决裂时，他们内心的战火其实并没有平息，它被锁进了我们的文化里，一门就门了350年。从那以后，高地和海岸再也无法用同样的眼光彼此相望。每一次我手都带着怀疑，每一句承诺都伴随着无声的拿证据来。You and me, all living on the surface. Hard to crack the matter open because it was too heavy. And that split, it planted two instincts on this island. One side always searching for lifelines and outside alliances. The other pulling inward, guarding itself but never fully trusting its own root. We learned to suspect even kindness. These weren't just survival moves. They became living identity. handed down like family heirlooms, deciding who we stand with, who we trust, and who we don't. Fast forward 3.5 centuries, our Taiwan parliament fights, our politics, still echoing the language of that old wound. Two sides facing off like they were never one family to begin with. Swing outwards and argue inwards like the battle kept spraying salt on the old amputated root again and again. 我们依然卡在同样的问题上，主权、小众、生存，原地踏步350年，也没有真正挖掘问题的根源，拉到最初的一切伤口。只是如今对立方式换成了麦克风、直播和社群媒体，而不是长矛和血流。问题是，断根的回响仍然存在。在我们真正面对一切开始的地方之前，回响会持续缠绕我们的回答，